Why am I bringing that up? Because, ladies and gentlemen, you need to understand that's what will lose you an election. See, the GOP already got it plotted. They're going to air that all over the place. Senator Josh Hawley is going to be on Fox News and other platforms, Newsmax and everything else. They're going to play that.
Stephen A. Smith warns that the Democratic Party faces serious challenges and should adjust its approach to avoid further setbacks.
77 million people voted for Donald Trump. 74 plus million for Kamala Harris. There's tens of millions of people out there. They're going to see that video. They're going to show it to them over and over. And they're going to say, that's the Dems. You have to immediately disassociate yourself from that rhetoric. I'm only talking about the rhetoric. I'm not talking about her as a person. I'm not talking about liberals who support transgender rights or anything. I'm not talking about.
Remember when he cautioned the party about concerns around leadership ahead of the 2024 race, and those warnings were largely set aside? We all saw what followed. Now Stephen returns, laying out why Democrats continue to struggle, how these patterns form, and why they could matter again by 2028. We've gathered the relevant details here as always. Subscribe if you want to follow along, and let's get into it today.
You got to see this to believe it. This, reading from USA Today, a Senate committee hearing about abortion medication has gone viral after Republican U.S. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri and Ashley Moody of Florida asked an obstetrician gynecologist if men can get pregnant. Republican Senator Josh Hawley grilled Dr. Nisha Verma, an OBGYN, who refused to answer that very question. Can men get pregnant? Repeatedly, and I mean repeatedly.
Stephen A. Smith spoke plainly as he outlined why Democrats experienced repeated electoral losses, arguing that certain policies, messaging choices, and strategic decisions conflicted with widely accepted evidence, reasoning, and everyday expectations. Ideas that had long been treated as established science or broadly understood principles were, in his view, reframed, adjusted, or set aside in ways that appeared driven more by political narratives than practical outcomes. He pointed to areas such as healthcare, education, public safety, and environmental policy, describing a pattern that left many voters uncertain and uneasy. Observers watched as proposals emerged that felt disconnected from lived realities or difficult to reconcile with common experience. Stephen A. emphasized that his critique was not personal, but structural, suggesting a growing gap between party leadership and how many Americans interpret basic issues. These were not isolated missteps, he argued, but significant errors that help explain recent losses and could continue to create challenges if left unaddressed.
Spoiler alert, men cannot get pregnant. I'm not going to say anything else until you watch the video. See it for yourself. Take a look.
Dr. Verma, I wasn't sure I understood your answer to Senator Moody a moment ago. Do you think that men can get pregnant?
I hesitated there because I wasn't sure where the conversation was going or what the goal was. I mean, I do take care of patients with different identities. I take care of many women. I take care of people with different identities. And so that's where I paused. I think, yeah, I wasn't sure where you were going with that.
Well, the goal is just the truth. So can men get pregnant?
Again, the reason I paused there is I'm not really sure what the...
At the center of his argument was a basic, widely understood point that he felt was avoided rather than addressed directly. He pointed to a moment when a respected medical professional was asked a clear question and responded with careful wording instead of a direct answer. Stephen A. Smith used this exchange to illustrate how unclear responses and political phrasing can frustrate the public and weaken trust. In his view, this habit of sidestepping straightforward questions and overcomplicating simple issues contributed to broader voter dissatisfaction during the 2024 election cycle. He suggested that without reflection and adjustment, similar outcomes could emerge again. Looking ahead to 2028, Stephen A. urged party leaders to reconsider their direction, emphasizing balance, moderation, and policies grounded in practical concerns. For him, the issue goes beyond labels. He framed it as staying connected to everyday expectations, noting that repeated misjudgments could continue to lead to electoral setbacks if left unaddressed.
Let me just remind you what you testified to a moment ago. Science and evidence should control, not politics. So, can men get pregnant? You're a
totally
doctor, I
agree.
think.
Science and evidence should guide medicine.
Do science and evidence tell us that men can get pregnant, biological men? Can they get pregnant?
I also think yes/no questions like this are a political tool. And
No, yes/no questions are about the truth, doctor. Let's not make a mockery of this proceeding. This is about science and evidence, and I'm asking you. You know, the United States Supreme Court just heard arguments yesterday at great length on this question. This is not a hypothetical question. This is not theoretical. It affects real people in their real lives.
The physician initially shared a clear and reasonable principle, stating that policy decisions should rely on science and sound reasoning rather than political pressure. However, when Senator Josh Hawley pressed her to stand firmly behind that position, the exchange highlighted a broader issue Stephen A. says he has pointed out for years. According to him, even straightforward topics are frequently turned into political performance. Issues that should be factual, evidence-based, and easy to understand become reframed through partisan lenses, leaving many Americans confused and frustrated. He argues that this constant politicization erodes trust, weakens productive discussion, and alienates voters who want leadership that feels practical and coherent. This, he stresses, is not about party allegiance, but about clarity and consistency. In Stephen A.'s view, prioritizing ideology over observable reality has contributed to repeated setbacks, and without meaningful change, he believes it could continue to affect future election outcomes.
You cannot have that. As a Democratic Party, you cannot be associated with that. I'm talking about an unwillingness and an inability to answer the question. If you think men can get pregnant and you think you have scientific data to back that up, say so. If you don't have the scientific data to back it up, and you're purported to be a scientist, Dr. Nisha Verma, and the question is asked and you don't have proof to validate that men get pregnant, can men get pregnant, then the answer would be no. She refused to answer the question. That cannot happen.
Stephen A.'s message to the Democratic Party is clear and firm. If leaders believe their positions are supported by science and data, he argues, then they should explain that support openly, directly, and without hesitation. And if the evidence falls short, he says, honesty matters just as much. No deflection, no careful phrasing, no hiding behind unclear language. In his view, many voters are looking for transparency, straightforward explanations, and verifiable facts. He suggests people are growing tired of feeling lectured, misled, or guided emotionally when simple, direct answers would be enough. Stephen A. believes the party has moved away from that approach, choosing caution and ambiguity over clarity and trust. He warns that this doesn't just frustrate voters, it risks losing them altogether. If Democrats want to rebuild confidence and compete successfully again, he says the path is straightforward. Focus on facts, respect the audience, and communicate honestly, even when the message is uncomfortable.
77 million people voted for Donald Trump. 74 plus million for Kamala Harris. There's tens of millions of people out there. They're going to see that video. They're going to show it to them over and over. And they're going to say, that's the Dems. You have to immediately disassociate yourself from that rhetoric. I'm only talking about the rhetoric. I'm not talking about her as a person. I'm not talking about liberals who support transgender rights or anything. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an unwillingness to answer direct questions.
Stephen A. Smith suggests the more effective response would have been for the DNC to clearly distance itself from the doctor's comments, but that never happened, and he argues the silence was telling. Once again, he says, the party appeared unwilling to challenge its most vocal internal critics. While that group may represent a smaller share of the base, their influence is significant, and leadership often seems hesitant to risk conflict. Rather than setting clear direction, the party follows, and instead of drawing firm boundaries, it moves cautiously around internal pressure. Stephen A. contends this imbalance has given a relatively small but outspoken faction outsized sway over messaging and even conversations tied to science and policy. The result, he argues, is a party that frequently sounds disconnected from broader public sentiment by amplifying positions most voters do not actually hold. From his perspective, leadership guided by fear weakens credibility and contributes to electoral losses. Until the DNC is willing to push back against its most extreme voices and reassert a more balanced approach, he believes the same pattern is likely to repeat with similar consequences.
I'm telling you right now, if you embrace that kind of nonsense, where somebody is in front of the camera on Capitol Hill or the combination of both, and they can't acknowledge something that simple, you've already lost. Because Trump and the right are going to sit up there and say, is that what you want our country to become? Is that what you want our country to stand on? That's the reason I brought that up.
Stephen A. Smith argues that by choosing to not clearly separate itself from controversial comments, the DNC effectively handed Donald Trump an easy advantage. In his view, the situation created ready-made campaign material without requiring any added interpretation. He suggests Trump could simply replay the remarks as they were and allow audiences to draw their own conclusions. Repeated exposure to those clips, he warns, risks framing the Democratic Party as disconnected, unclear, or unwilling to address straightforward concerns. By not responding early, Stephen A. believes, the party allowed a momentary issue to turn into a lingering weakness. He emphasizes that missteps like this do more than complicate messaging. They shape how voters perceive leadership and credibility. And once that impression settles in during an election cycle, he notes, changing it becomes extremely difficult.
Right now, the right is reeling, no matter what they say. No matter what they say. You still haven't finalized addressing the Affordable Care Act subsidies. Healthcare is still, price for healthcare is still expected to skyrocket. Price for insurance, price for products throughout this country. We're looking at inflationary times. The value of the dollar is dissipating before our very eyes. Things need to happen. Things need to get done. Everybody knows there's bigger fish to fry than issues like this.
Stephen A. Smith frames the heart of the debate around a single issue, trust. He argues that if Americans cannot depend on the Democratic Party to communicate clearly and honestly about science and basic facts, it becomes difficult to expect confidence in its ability to govern effectively. Trust, he emphasizes, is not situational. It develops gradually and depends on consistency. While major topics like the economy, inflation, and national security remain critical, he suggests credibility is built first on simpler matters. When leaders avoid direct answers or allow ideology to complicate straightforward issues, it raises concerns about how they would manage larger responsibilities. Stephen A. notes that voters recognize these warning signs, and once confidence erodes, restoring it is extremely challenging. If a party struggles to offer clarity and transparency on everyday issues, many will naturally question its readiness to handle the country's most serious challenges. In his view, trust underpins everything in politics, and without it, little else can endure.
And you watch her dance, it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. And something like that, being associated with one side of the aisle, is detrimental to that side. I'm just giving you that perspective. That's the kind of stuff that will lose an election for you. Trust me on that. It will lose an election for you. When you've got Trump and the administration reeling because public opinion ain't on his side because of the way and the how in which they're doing certain things, causing chaos in the streets. One would easily argue that's what happened in 2020.
According to Stephen A. Smith, the DNC missed a clear opportunity to capitalize on missteps by Donald Trump and connect with broader public sentiment. He notes visuals of immigration enforcement officers patrolling neighborhoods tend to resonate poorly with many voters, particularly as more Americans express discomfort with aggressive encounters and heavy-handed approaches. In Stephen A.'s view, these moments can influence public opinion, especially among independents who are uneasy with confrontational imagery and tactics. In his view, this presented a chance for Democrats to emphasize compassion, order, and practical reform. Instead, he says, the party became distracted by internal debates and messaging that felt disconnected from everyday concerns, moving attention away from core issues that matter most to households. The result, he suggests, was a diluted message that failed to draw clear contrasts. Stephen A.'s conclusion is straightforward. When an opponent falters, effective leadership responds with clarity, focus, and credibility, rather than letting the moment pass.
But even then, George Floyd happened. And the racial reckoning that existed in this country was coming home. And all of those things happened. And you know what American voters said? You had Republicans with Trump, wouldn't budge. You had liberals on the opposite side that was going to go with Biden, especially after Representative Clyburn got involved and threw his support behind Biden and got him to win South Carolina, and things took off from there. But the real reason Trump lost the election in 2020 is because you had independents out there or moderates on the left or the right that said, we don't need this kind of chaos, we don't need this kind of noise.
In closing, Stephen A. Smith delivers a warning to the Democratic Party that he believes is difficult to ignore. He argues the DNC did not lose momentum because of a single election cycle or one headline moment, but because of a broader erosion of trust. By allowing political considerations to complicate basic facts, avoiding straightforward explanations, and letting a narrow but vocal group influence messaging, he suggests the party moved further away from the concerns of everyday Americans. Stephen A. emphasizes that voters are not demanding flawlessness. What they want, he says, is honesty, clarity, and practical judgment. When leadership overlooks clear strategic opportunities, struggles to manage public perception, or hesitates to address internal extremes, it creates openings for opponents to define the narrative. Once trust is damaged, he notes, rebuilding it is extremely difficult, and even strong policy proposals can lose their impact. Stephen A. outlines what he sees as a path forward: prioritize facts, respect the public's intelligence, reconnect with the political center, and show confidence in leadership decisions. Without meaningful adjustments, he warns, future election cycles could follow familiar patterns. And with that, we conclude today's discussion. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.